Welcome back, folks, and thank you for joining us for another soul-driven interview. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to Corinne Winters, an internationally acclaimed opera singer, voice teacher, writer, and creative living mentor. Welcome to the show, Corinne. Thank you for sharing your time with us and for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Anna.
And thank you for all of your patience before we started recording. We have been dealing with a lot of technical difficulties, and she's been so kind and patient.
No worries. After the year we've had, small potatoes.
Yeah, it's just wild when things won't work, right?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Um, so Corinne, I found her on Instagram, gosh, last fall, I believe, last fall, later part of last year. I'm not exactly sure. But if you're a regular listener of the Soul Driven podcast, you know I'm a huge fan of human design and practice it, I would say, from a high level perspective with my clients. Corinne not only works with human design, but she really just combines it with the art of living creatively. And I have so been enjoying her posts on Instagram. We'll, of course, have all of her links in the show notes, but make sure you follow her on Instagram because she's awesome. But I was like, I have to have her on the show. And just a little FYI that she has agreed to return for a discussion in the future so that we can actually dive even deeper on human design and really geek out. But because she has such a wide and varied background, I really wanted to get to know her, to understand more about her journey. And we'll definitely talk about human design because we found out that we're both manifesting generators with one third profiles here,
Mhm.
1 3 profiles. So we have a lot in common. Um, okay, so without further ado, Corinne, and I am saying your name correctly, right?
Yep, Corinne. Perfect.
I always freak out about that. I guess it's, old habit. What makes you soul driven?
When you sent me this question, I was thinking about it because soul driven is so evocative in the sense that you aren't just in touch with your soul, but you let it be your compass through life. And for me, in my work, I always equate the soul with the muse. So, my company is called Serve Your Muse. We can maybe get into that later, why that phrase is important to me. But for me, the muse is that part of your soul that creates from that spontaneous place, that person you were as a child before you were conditioned to be something you weren't, or when you were told you were too much or not enough. Certain aspects of your personality were off-putting, things like that. And actually getting back to the very things that you thought were flaws and letting them be part of your expression in the world. To me, that's being soul driven and not just saying, okay, I'm going to highlight these parts of me that I think are acceptable and then present that to people, but actually more of that messy human integrated part of us that we let lead us.
I love that. And I do love your business name, Serve Your Muse. And I love that you correlate it to with childhood because, I've had quite a few people on the show, and I think it's pretty much, it's talked about a lot just who we were as children and that inspired being, as a child. I feel like we're forever trying to get back to those places because that's where we are, our most authentic selves, right? Before all the pain, before all the conditioning, before all the, oh no, you can't be a princess, you can't be a unicorn.
Totally.
But what a beautiful life if we would have been told, like, yeah, girl, you could be a unicorn or you could be a princess. Um, so I love that so much. And I do think that that return is a return to our soul because I don't think we're ever as in touch with our soul as we are when we were children.
Absolutely. Not only because just from a brain perspective, the brain until age 7 is so malleable, it's like a sponge. And so we are by nature creative because we're living in this more of this alpha brain state that's more like, the brain state that you're in meditation, or when you're just really still and your mind is quiet. As children, we're living in that brain state constantly, which is why we're so open to suggestion. We were talking about hypnosis before we got on. It's that idea that children are in this constant state of hypnosis, but it's also what makes them so creative and so engaged with the world around them. And I also think it's not just these traits of inside of us that need to come through, but it's the traumas that happen to us. And I use trauma broadly in the sense that it doesn't have to be a huge trauma that we would think of as far as abuse or neglect or anything like that. But even these micro traumas that happen to us, they don't have to actually take away from our light or from what we have to offer, but they can be the road to it. So that's also kind of been a big part of my journey personally, but what I try to do with people, because I found that the things that I thought were going to hold me back are the things that actually gave me the grit and the backbone and the grounding and the wisdom to become who I was supposed to become.
Yeah, I was actually on a clubhouse in a clubhouse discussion yesterday, and we were touching on a subject which I feel like is what you're saying, just in regards to like the light and the dark being just as equally important, and that our light can't be as strong without the dark, and the things that we do go through in our life. I mean, I'm better for everything difficult I've been through in my life, for sure.
Yeah.
I'd probably be a little emotional brat. Definitely have a big ego if I hadn't been humbled through life. And but yeah, I fully agree with that in every way. And it's really goes back to, I think, to the laws of the universe. There is no light without dark. There is no darkness without light. We can't know love until we know the lack of love. We can't know what we like until we know what we don't like. They're equal parts. They're just as powerful on both sides. And it's certainly something I feel like it's been coming up a lot the past couple of months, just this understanding that every time I'm going to make a move forward and or do something creative in my life, that there is this other force, that comes in to push back on it as well. And I know creativity is like, it's your jam. So do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So it's my personality sun gate, which we'll get into when we talk more about human design. In Gene Keys, which I like to use some of that terminology, it's called life's work. For me, is about pattern recognition and being able to see how things will play out based on certain patterns that you see. And so for me, everything in my life is a microcosm of saying the same thing. So for example, like in singing technique, when I'm teaching my students, one of the things I say to them is that, you need to kind of narrow the way that you're singing so that you can then open up when you sing a high note. It's almost like crouching on a diving board. And then, the diver always crouches before they then jump in. It's the exact same in life, in the sense that there's always that contraction before an expansion. There's always that moment of, I actually had a workshop on imposter syndrome that I did on Sunday. It was beautiful, beautiful group of people that I led. But I was telling them that there's this gap sometimes between when we're up leveling, between where we are and how other people view us, and kind of bridging that gap. And that's that gnarly kind of constriction before the expansion. And I think we can see that in so many different areas of our lives, but that constriction doesn't have to be so heavy. We can almost like have a bit of humor around it and be like, this is just the journey before we have the expansion, and that's okay.
Yeah, Elizabeth Gilbert has talked about that quite a bit when she talked about creativity, just in regards to, Elizabeth Gilbert, for those who don't know, I'm sure Eat, Love, Pray. But I always enjoy hearing her talk about creativity, but that's the thing she's always kind of throwing down, is that every time she is coming out with something, this other energy is coming in, and how she has made friends with it and welcomes it. And it's just kind of like, hey, how long are you going to be hanging out this time?
Absolutely.
What are you going to try and throw into the middle of my tracks? Okay. Makes a joke of it, a game of it. So it's not like, this big heaviness that's a negative thing that throws her all off whack, that gets her emotionally taken out, to the place where she has to recover. She's just like welcomes it in and says, you do your thing, and I'm going to watch you and laugh at you. And then we're going to move forward.
Yeah, that's beautiful. She's so wise. I love that woman.
Yes, she is amazing. So just to lay a little bit of groundwork, I typically love to jump right into people's backgrounds, but I thought that first we would just start and clarify what human design is for folks, because I'm sure it's going to be popping in and out through this conversation.
Yeah.
So that they have a little bit of base ground. So could you share with us what human design is?
Sure. I actually work with a lot of people who aren't really in the spiritual or self-development space. So I have kind of several definitions, one that's a little more in that world and one that's a little more in like layman's world, someone who just wants to be in touch more with who they are. So I'm going to start with the more basic one, which is basically that human design is a practical system for knowing ourselves. So when I say practical, it's that it's not just a typology. So there are a lot of great typologies out there, like the Myers-Briggs and Enneagram, and even like some other personality typing things, astrology, which obviously goes much deeper than typology, but we sort of have, okay, this is my sun sign, this is my moon sign. And while there can be certain directives in those typologies, they're not as rooted in action-based directives. So in human design, it's not only understanding how your mental, emotional, psychological, and physical landscape are designed to operate uniquely, but it's how you can actually craft your life, craft your decision-making around this way that you're hardwired. So the thing that attracted me to human design is that it's such a holistic system, because it actually takes into account every aspect of the human. So its prime, I would say, focus is the energetic plane, mainly because things are more obvious to us on the sort of tangible plane, but energetically, and energetic doesn't have to be woo-woo. It can also mean like just the nonverbal presence you give off around people. So that's what I try to explain to my clients that are a little more skeptical, which I totally respect, because I have a lot of logic in my design, and I am not just a sort of like love and light in the clouds kind of person. I'm very grounded and respect both sides, because again, the dark and the light, like the rooted and grounded earthly skeptical side, and then the sort of more ethereal side. And I think human design touches on both of those. So as far as the action-based piece, we learn the imprint basically that we give off when we walk into a space. It's how we either draw things to us or project things out from us. It's the relationship we have between other people and how to make that more harmonious. And in general, how to live more in flow so that we're moving forward in a sort of with more ease in life rather than hitting resistance and roadblocks.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think too, like with the energetic component, it feels very scientific to me.
Yeah.
Just the movement of energy in our body. That's usually kind of how I describe it. Because I feel like that, at least for me at this point in time with where I'm at in my studies of human design, what brought me back, because I learned about human design in 2019 and dove in pretty hard, as I do. And I then of course like saw the depth of it and backed off. But the rest of that year, I ended up diving into energy very intensely and doing like a lot of energy work and learning how to do like, work with crystals. And then the beginning of 2020, then I started, reading in the Akashic records and doing other energy work, and just really came into the fullness of understanding energy. And that's what like totally drew me back to human design. And just, because everything is energy, and having a system that helps us to explain how it actually works uniquely in each of our bodies is like, it's so powerful, you know?
It's invaluable. And there's nothing else I found like it, because understanding our psyches, it is important, and human design does cover some of that, but understanding the nonverbal plane is so invaluable, because those are the things that are sort of more subversive in our personality, and things that maybe we in the past haven't thought that we had much control over, the vibes that we're giving off, things like that. Or even from a more practical standpoint, like, I'm doing all the right things, but I keep hitting roadblocks in my life, even though I'm doing what society says is like, you do X, Y, Z in this order, and then things should work out. And when they don't, we feel like there's something wrong with us. And the thing that really drew me to human design is like, no, if you're operating how you're uniquely hardwired to operate, then actually you're going to feel flow. It's not that we'll never have adversity, but within that adversity, there's going to be this feeling of like, I'm where I'm meant to be. I'm living the life I'm meant to be living.
Yeah. Well, and even, that flow is going to be easier even with adversity.
Yeah.
And for folks looking for like a tangible example, one of my favorite ones goes back to my partner is a projector and I'm a manifesting generator. And one of the like, elements in our relationship is just that he really likes to tell me what to do at any given point in time.
Yep.
And Corinne's laughing because she knows where this is going, probably.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as he would tell me what to do, like there was almost this immediate pushback towards him. It was just like, no. And, like I'm 5 years old again. And he's like, this like father figure, whatever in my life. And when I realized that dynamic that was playing out between us was the fact that like projectors really kind of need to ask, if they can share or something like that before they just like throw out their wisdom. In addition to the way that manifesting generators are just not open to those kinds of things all the time, it was like, because I thought multiple times, like, wow, why can't I, this sharing gets stuck with me. Why can't I take this in better? And so I would beat myself up about it or think, and he would also be like, what's wrong? I'm just trying to help, and so understanding just that small energetic dynamic was huge. So I just wanted to share that for folks who maybe don't have much foundation with human design, or also just really put it in tangible perspective, how enormous these like you said, Corinne, the unspoken, the unspoken world really.
Yes, absolutely. And until we have the knowledge to know how these things are playing out and why they are, it's really hard to shift them, because we think, oh, this is just how I am, or this is part of us. And maybe it is how you are, but maybe it's coming from a place of misalignment rather than, from that truest part of you. So that's what we're always trying to discern, is like, what is, the truest part of me, and what is the conditioned part of me, meaning the part that society told you was acceptable or that you had to be. There's one really good example, just to get deeper into the topic of the energy types, because Anna was starting to talk about 2 of the 5 energy types. Society basically gives us this model of how we should be, which is a hybrid of 2 types, the manifestor and the generator. So it's like, we should just go out and do it. We should be able to have an idea and just execute it, which is only about 8 or 9% of the population that can do that successfully. So that's already setting most of us up for failure. But then we're expected to not only be the fire starter, but to carry out this thing that we started, that we sparked, to its completion. And that is only, people that can complete things are only about 37% of the population. And even then, they're not the same people that are the fire starters. So basically, society is telling us we have to be this bionic human that no one actually is. And I find that frustrating, but also empowering when we learn about human design, because we learn actually we're meant to operate in community, and we're meant to operate bouncing off each other and not existing in a vacuum, which I think COVID has also shown us, right? That we don't exist in a vacuum. Even if we are the strongest, rugged individualist you could ever find, you are still reliant on other people as they are you, and we exist in this ecosystem together. And I think that's so good to know, because the fire starters and the builders can work together and create this masterpiece that they couldn't do on their own.
Yeah. The one of the things that I so appreciate about all of these different, modalities, systems, what did you call it, a typology, um, is that it just really helps to give us a lot more compassion for ourselves and the people in our lives, which
Yes.
is invaluable. And
I
helps
think,
us helps us love when maybe it's tough.
oh yeah, yeah. I will say though, I think that's true when people actually take the information they learn, absorb it, and apply it.
Yeah.
As a manifesting generator, which again, we'll get into more of what that is. And also as an Aries, I'm somebody who's just like, okay, I need to take this and put it into action. If I'm not doing something with it, then I just feel like this information's going in one ear and out the other.
Yeah.
And I know sometimes in the past, like when I learned my Myers-Briggs, I was like, oh, that's interesting, but I never actually used it to understand myself better or to understand my partner better, things like that. And I know there are people who do with that system, absolutely. But, different things resonate with different people, just like different religions, different cities, all these, there's a reason we have diversity in the world, because it resonates in different ways with different people. But I love with human design that we almost feel this pull inside us when we learn this information to take it and apply it. It's so applicable and so grounded and easy to use in everyday life instead of just being this idea.
Yeah. There is something that I feel is very actionable about it in general. So I think before I'm like, really, we are going to get to your background.
That's okay. When it happens, it happens.
As you already touched on this a little bit, before we jump in there, maybe we should just go ahead and talk about the 5 types and just briefly kind of explain what they are.
Yep. So as Anna mentioned, human design has many layers to it. So the energy types, though, is the most basic because it gives you what I call your flow strategy. So in traditional human design, it's just called strategy, but it really means like the way that you operate in the world is kind of, if you're operating with this flow strategy, you're going to live more in flow than you will in resistance. So the way that your energy is designed to operate determines how you get into flow. So that's why it's kind of the first piece. The next piece would be the decision-making authority, which we may or may not cover. But I always love that human design actually helps you to be able to do such practical things like make decisions in a way that's unique and, not have to hit roadblocks all the time. So, yeah, so that's kind of the basis of it. So we'll start with the fire starters, the manifestors, because they are the kind of the ones that get the ball rolling. Like I sort of think of the 5 types as each building on the next. So I would say the manifestor is like the one who lights the spark, who's the ideas and visions person, the one who can just create from a divine inspiration within them. So it's this idea that like someone who's a manifestor would get an urge inside of them. And then based on that urge, as long as their mind and their conditioning doesn't get involved, they could then go make that thing happen in the world without needing any external stimuli or interaction. They are the only type that are equipped to do this in that specific way. And as I think I mentioned before, they're only 8 to 9% of the population. So it's a very small group of people. And I think if you think about it, it makes sense because if everyone was out there getting these urges and initiating 24/7, then a lot of things wouldn't get completed because people would want to just keep initiating. So it makes sense that only a tenth or less of the people have this ability. Traditionally, these were the kings of society, the dictators, people like that. But we are kind of moving out of that era. And actually the manifestors now aren't so much the leaders and dictators. They're becoming more of the innovators and more of the sort of figureheads behind, innovation and the creators, the start of the creation. Some famous manifestors were Maya Angelou. If you think about the way that she spoke and her words landed, the way that she started movements. Gloria Steinem, the feminist, is another one. On a sort of morbid note, but just to give you an idea, Hitler was also a manifestor. So someone who just has that charisma and ability to rally people. After manifestors, we have generators. So generators are the ones who, I would say, like, American society is probably the most tailored to generators day to day. So if manifestors are meant to get things going, but then once they're going, they're meant to initiate something new again, generators take that and they actually build on it. So generators have this sustained energy to complete something through to the end, but they don't actually have the ability to start something from just an idea. So with generators, the way that they would sort of get in flow is by what human design language says is responding to life. So it sounds a little confusing for people who don't really understand what that means, but all it means is that whatever life throws at you, you're staying present enough to be able to respond to what feels good and what doesn't feel good. So because generators have this motor that's meant to sustain energy, it really needs to be involved in, it doesn't have to be all, but most activities that feel good. So for example, if a generator wakes up one day, it wouldn't just be, oh, I have an idea, I want to do this, and then do it. They'd probably hit roadblocks. But if a generator went on a walk and saw a sign for something and was like, oh, that sounds cool, and followed it up, then it would most likely lead to something interesting. So that response can be from something you see on Instagram, on a sign. It can be something someone said. It can be a response to something you read in a book, anything external. So it just needs to be not coming from your mind, but actually just something life throws at you. Because while the manifestors have this aura that projects out and initiates out, generators have a magnetic aura that draws things to it. So it's that generators have that classic synchronistic type aura where when they're letting life come to them, magic happens. But when they're trying to push out, that's when they hit the roadblocks. So then there's the manifesting generators, who are kind of a hybrid of the two. And there are different flavors of manifesting generators, but they're a weird one because mechanically they operate most like a generator. So they do have the ability to sustain energy over time, and they are meant to respond to life. But often that response time is really quick because when they respond, they can initiate immediately without having to have a step-by-step kind of slow and steady process the way that the generators do. So I always tell people, fundamentally, manifesting generators are a generator type, but they're able to manifest almost instantly, just not instantly. So something is thrown at a manifesting generator that seems interesting, and it's probably not even a second before they're moving into action. Whereas with the generators, there's a little bit more of a lag time between, am I interested in this or am I not, to feel into that. Manifesting generators are the quickest of types. So they kind of launch into things once they get that enthusiasm that comes from within. Another difference is that generators have this process where they move slow and steady and hit a plateau. And then they hit a plateau, kind of stay there for a while to hone their process, and then they move through the plateau. Manifesting generators aren't really meant to plateau because they move so fast and so efficiently that then when something kind of loses steam, they're meant to put it away, either indefinitely or for a while. So depending on, one has to use his or her own discernment to know whether, okay, am I meant to give this up, or do I just need to pivot and do something else for a while? And that's kind of the energy of the manifesting generator, since it has both types. It's like, I'm doing something, okay, I don't feel like doing this anymore, I'm going to pivot. So it's quite playful. And again, society conditions us out of that because we're meant to stick with something or really see things through to the end, which isn't really healthy for the manifesting generator. Then we have the projectors. As Anna mentioned, her partner's a projector. I didn't mention as well that generators are about 37% of the population, and manifesting generators are about 33%. And then projectors are about 20. So projectors are interesting because they're kind of rising up as the new world leaders. So instead of being the people that were sort of forgotten about and left behind, which I think is how they were sort of thought of in the past, projectors are stepping up because they have this incredible bird's eye lens of seeing the world. So what they do doesn't so much matter. Whereas with the other three types, their action kind of defines who they are in a lot of ways. Whereas with the projector, it's their perspective that is the most interesting. So projectors don't have the energy, just like manifestors, to sustain over time. And they also aren't able to initiate. But when their perspective is invited in or recognized by someone else, they're able to guide the processes of other people and really bring this like unique kind of visionary, interesting lens to how systems can be improved and refined. So as I've heard other people say in the past, projectors aren't meant to do all the doing. They're meant to guide the process of the other three types and really help them hone their process and make systems more efficient. So an example of a projector would be Queen Elizabeth in England. So if you think about that, there's probably a reason she's still living in her 90s, because she never did all the doing. She guided other people. Barack Obama is a projector, another great example. Is an amazing guide and intellectual, but he had Congress and Senate doing a lot of stuff, right? He wasn't doing all the doing. I didn't mention the other types, but a generator that just popped into my head is Lin-Manuel Miranda, who wrote Hamilton. If you guys are into musicals, I just find him so sparkly because generators tend to be really sparkly. Meryl Streep is also a generator. Oprah's a generator. So they've got this kind of warm, sparkly energy. Gaga, perfect, exactly. Manifesting generator example would be Angelina Jolie. So if you think about it, like Angelina Jolie is an actress, mother, was a wife, humanitarian. She's doing all the different things. So as I mentioned about MGs, we have to kind of pivot when something isn't, the energy isn't there, into something else, and then maybe pivot back. So having these different pots can be really energizing and nourishing. Same with Jessica Alba, who's also one. So she's actress, mother, and then has a makeup company and clean products company on the side. So good examples of MGs. And then the last type is a reflector. So reflectors are only 1% of the population. And they're really the, obviously reflector is a really evocative term, but I call them the illuminators. So they are incredibly empathic and really soak up, engage the energy that's around them more than any other type. So if the manifestors are getting things going, the generators and manifesting generators are building, creating, doing these types of things. The projectors are guiding the process. The reflectors are reflecting back how it's all going. Because they're so empathic, they're able to see into things in a way the other types aren't, and to really say, this is what I'm noticing in the state of the business, the world, whatever the case is, this relationship, or how you're doing. They're really able to reflect back the truth of what's happening and not necessarily the way that the person outside of them is perceiving it. So reflectors are also meant to be really fluid. They're not very fixed people. They're meant to be in this interesting flow of life that allows them to sample all the things life has to offer, but not cling to any one thing, which again, they can be very easily conditioned out of. But they're really meant to sort of embrace this part of themselves and show us that you don't have to have this fixed identity to be someone, that you can really define yourself through the lack of definition, through tasting all of these different experiences and letting yourself be fluid. So big sort of explanation, but important to understand the nuances of how these types operate.
And Jennifer Bullock is a reflector, right?
Sandra Bullock.
Sandra Bullock.
Yes. Oh, yes. Sandra Bullock. Trying to think if there's any other one that would be quite common. I know the Russian writer Dostoevsky, if any of you guys are into literature, he was one, but there aren't many because it's only 1%. So
I've never met one. I'm like surrounded by projectors and manifestors and Gs. But I haven't. Have you worked with a reflector?
Yes, I had one in my perfectionism workshop. So I do these workshops sort of bi-monthly or 4 times a year, something like that, on different topics related to creative expression and fears. And then we approach it from a psychology, human design, and like sort of everyday tools kind of lens. And I was so amazed because I had every type, including a reflector, and several different decision-making authorities for each type. And I was just like, wow, this is the most diverse group of people I've ever seen. So clearly perfectionism affects everyone.
That's so cool. That's really cool. I'm looking forward to the day when I get to meet a reflector. I'm just really curious about the energy and yeah, looking forward to that. I think that would be super cool.
It's a beautiful energy. They're just such magical humans and have such an interesting lens to bring to the rest of us.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. So you touched a little bit on yourself and who you are, and I think it's hilarious because I mean, I feel like you and I could just continue talking about all of these things, but I want to make sure that we talk about your story because you have such a unique background, of course, Miss Manifesting Generator.
All the
All the
things.
things. I just kind of like introduced myself as that these days. I'm like, I'm a manifesting generator. Okay. Like
Exactly.
it might seem like I'm all over the place, but I'm not.
Yep.
So, you know, opera singer, teacher, like all of these different things. What I guess maybe like a good place to start is just kind of like, can you share some of your background with us?
Mhm.
Kind of, you know, tell us how you came upon this path for yourself.
Yeah. I grew up in an interesting, wild, but volatile family. Parents who loved me fiercely, but divorced when I was very young because of their own issues and problems. Very fiery, creative, and hard-headed people. But it's really interesting because I, was born in the early to mid 80s. When my parents divorced when I was 2 or 3, I was one of the first people I knew who had divorced parents because it just wasn't as common back then. And I always saw that as there was something broken about me. There was something wrong with me, especially the living situation we had because my parents had equally split custody. So I spent 3.5 days at one house and 3.5 days at another house. And I felt really kind of split in half in that way. But I love my parents and wanted to spend time with them. There were some other issues with the personalities in my family that I found challenging, which now that I know they're human designs makes a lot of sense. But the thing that really bothered me about this transient lifestyle actually has been the thing that's been the most helpful in the kind of life I lead, which is in non-COVID times, traveling, transient, unstable in the traditional sense of the word, and was really preparing me for this life. It was my first sense of like, oh, wow, the universe really has a method to its madness. Because as I grew up and realized I had musical talent, I wanted to be a pop or rock singer like everybody else. So I was doing open mic nights, and my dad has musical talent. He was in a rock band. He's a lawyer, but he was in a rock band in college and in his early years practicing law. But I took a voice lesson because I was like, well, maybe I want to take a few college courses when I go to college in music. And I took a voice lesson. The teacher was sort of bowled over, and she's like, you have an operatic voice. Like, you need to pursue this. And I'm like, what? Like, I don't know anything about opera. I'm an American kid from the suburbs, didn't grow up with culture or anything like that. And she's like, no, you need to try this. So I thought, okay, we'll see. But as I learned more about it and as I embraced it, I realized that not only was the actual job something I was really interested in, but that I was uniquely hardwired for the job. So it kind of combines like languages, fashion, theater, musical study, and having a musician's background. Obviously, having a good voice, a powerful voice, moving well on stage, being able to travel most of the year, being independent, being resilient, and being able to take criticism. There were so many things that I realized, wow, I actually have all of this within me. And it's this one job that always keeps me guessing and never keeps me bored. And I think it's the MG thing, whereas like, even though it's only one profession, there's so many different aspects of it that I was never really just sitting there twiddling my thumbs. So I just kept going. And the way I describe it is like every time I thought about quitting or every time I was getting, a lot of failures, which everybody in creative work does. It's just a thing. Failure is a normal part of the process. It doesn't mean that you are a failure. It's just part of the deal. Every time I was going to quit, just when I needed it to, a door opened. So it's not that I didn't have the adversity or didn't have loads of failures, more failures than successes, but when I needed it to, a door opened and I was able to move through to the next level or the next experience. And it showed me that, like, yes, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. There was an element of flow even amidst all the hard work that I had to put in. And so I was an opera singer for a decade, still am. I'm going back to work in a couple of weeks, which is so exciting because I've been off for the last 15 months. Um, but in the pandemic, let's say holding period, gestation period, I started thinking about what other parts of my creative expression wanted to come through me, because I've been a writer my whole life. And despite singing for thousands of people on major world stages, I never put my writing out there. I love teaching, I love mentoring, but sort of shied away from it because I thought people in the business would think I was, moving away from the performing and into the teaching. So I didn't want to send the wrong message. And when your whole livelihood that you've been working at for decades is taken away, you start to go, well, I don't really care what other people think anymore. I'm going to do whatever that expression, that muse soul expression is calling me to do. And I have all the time in the world right now, so I'm just going to do it. So I started taking more voice students in the past year, and I started blogging on Serve Your Muse. So it just became a platform for, I called it writing about creativity, beauty, and the grittiness of being human. So it was just about anything that I really wanted to express that week. And I started a newsletter doing that. And it was really great because I was still practicing, even though I wasn't performing, but I was also teaching and then had started the blog. And then I'd also been a practitioner of human design for a couple of years, not a teacher, but using it for myself, and found it really helpful. So I thought, whoa, this would be a perfect companion to the mentorship and the creativity piece, because it's really teaching people to live as they are. And that's the essence of creativity, is really you being your truest expression, because to be creative, you have to be original. Creativity and talent are two different things. So to be creative isn't about how much talent you have. It's about being an original human, living from this spontaneous, what we were talking about at the beginning of the call, this sort of alive moment to moment part of you that isn't prepackaged and rigid and trying to fit the mold. So in having that epiphany, I thought, oh, I could blend these modalities in a really cool way to maybe start another business. So I got my human design certification. I did a lot of study on my own, and then basically blended these. And my husband's very crafty on the computer and helped build me a website during the break. So on 11/11/2020, I launched Serve Your Muse. And I've been so honored to guide people in workshops, private sessions, just connect with interesting people I would have never met on Instagram, and just also channel this other part of me, and to be able to really combine the things that are important to me, which is having this sense of wonder and inspiration and synchronicity in life, but really grounding it in everyday tools, because we are human beings at the end of the day. We're not living in other realms. And I totally believe that there's much more to the world than meets the eye, but we're here to have a human experience. And I feel like that's one of my gifts, is being able to ground everything in a real sustainable sort of everyday way. And since then, I've just been continuing all the businesses, and they're all thriving and also going on my own terms. Like, I'm not posting endlessly on Instagram like I was in the beginning when I launched Serve Your Muse, because I felt like if I didn't keep up with the Instagram hustle, that my business wasn't going to go anywhere. It was all fear-based. The very thing I was trying to help people move out of and move through, I was buying into. And I thought, if I'm going to teach this, I can't also be playing the game. So when I really feel like posting, sometimes I go a week and post every day, and then I'll go 3 weeks and not post anything. And I just have to trust that that's that compass that we talked about, that soul-driven motivation is guiding me. And that's what I'm trying to live by today and help other people live by.
Yeah. It's so important to do that, but it's definitely hard as a business owner, because like you talked about when you're talking about generators, and I mean, just with your own business, and certainly within mine, there's always so much pressure. Everybody has that pressure. Everyone knows, you need to hustle, all that, those mentalities that are really pressurized into our culture, and kind of flow out to everybody. And everyone thinks that we need to go about life in particular ways. One of the things that like you talk about on your website is creative self-expression. And I've really enjoyed how it is that you explain and talk about the different human design types, the ways in which we approach just a variety of different things. Um, but I would love for you to kind of share what creative self-expression is for you, like why you think it's so important, some of the ways that you like to do that within your own personal life.
Yeah. So, as I alluded to, creativity and talent can go hand in hand, but they don't necessarily. So, I know a lot of talented people who aren't very creative, meaning they kind of do things prescriptively by the book. And I know incredibly creative people who don't have one particular talent, but the way they live their lives is creative. And that's what I'm most interested in helping people do. So, I do work with a lot of artists, but I don't exclusively want to work with artists only because I think it's important for anybody to be able to tap into more of this creative self-expression. So I call it creative living only because it's a riff on a psychological term that was coined by Donald Winnicott, who's a British psychologist. And he used it to actually discuss children and how when children are living creatively, they feel safe to kind of break away from their parents and embrace their individuality by living in their moment to moment impulses. It's like, oh, I'm interested in this. I'm fully in flow with this and engrossed. And I'm going to really express myself through this medium. And then I'm going to go do this thing instead of living what he calls in compliance, which is complying with the way the world tells us to be. When I learned about that in my psychology studies, that resonated with me so deeply because I thought, yes, we need this in artistic creative work, but like everyday humans need this. We need to live creatively to really be fulfilled in our lives, no matter what we're doing. And that can be a stay-at-home mom, that can be an artist, that can be an entrepreneur, it can be anything. So it's more of the consciousness with which we do life rather than the actual thing that we're doing. That's what I try to impart to clients. So the way I get there is working through the blocks to that. So the thing is, that is our natural expression. But the reason we don't live it is because of the conditioning in the blocks. So some of the conditioning I talk about through the human design chart. Other parts of it I talk about through things like perfectionism, imposter syndrome, the pressure to conform, the fear of being seen and heard, all the things that prevent us from actually living this way because of these walls that we've built up through, let's be honest, systems of oppression and the patriarchy, which have created a lot of this. It's not all self-created through our psychology or through our traumas, but it's actually, there are systems that make this a lot harder for some people than for others. But it is the things that have happened to us personally and collectively. And things in our design that make us more inclined to have certain wounds or certain blocks. So I've had a few downloads based on my interpretation of the chart that certain parts of the chart speak to me in a way that are very specific to creativity. So if I see someone with a certain block, I can pretty much tell you exactly where that's going to come from 5 seconds looking at their chart. I just have the mind that works in this way that like I see it as this it comes off the page for me as this expression of them. And when I know a little bit about their story, I can kind of diagnose it as a doctor would, prescriptively looking at the chart, just like a doctor would at an x-ray, like, oh, okay, I can see where this might be showing up for you. So that's where that expression kind of plays out, is like in this creative living and then acknowledging and moving through, not eliminating, but moving through the blocks that are holding us back from it.
And the creative living that you're talking about, this is the modality that you created, correct? Like that's kind of what you were describing, is your ability to go in and see these aspects of the chart in a very unique way. Is that correct?
Yep. It's combining the different practices and modalities that I use in my work. So I use these psychological teachings from Winnicott and other psychologists. I use human design work. I use creative practices. So with my one-on-one clients, I give them writing prompts, creative writing prompts when I send. So I always record all of the sessions. And then when I send the recording of the session, I give writing prompts that are prescribed for their design and for the blocks that they're moving through. And I have a very specific way I like my clients to write the prompts so that it actually accesses more of the subconscious mind rather than just being, okay, let me think about what I'm going to write. But there are certain free form styles of writing where you can really get into what's going on below the surface to move through those blocks. And then the everyday tools of, okay, when this real life situation shows up, how do I deal with it?
What happens for folks who like aren't into writing?
So what I try to tell people is like, I've noticed for emotionally defined people, many of them are more into writing because writing is a really, really good way. And I know we haven't mentioned about definition in the centers, but emotionally defined people are people who have these inbuilt emotional waves that are not dependent on what's going on outside of them, but actually are part of the energetic current that runs within them cyclically and is completely unique to them. So people who operate like this tend to have, when they're in a low emotional wave, have a natural inclination toward creativity, especially with things like journaling, writing, any kind of, it doesn't have to be writing, but any kind of expression that helps move through that low wave. That is definitely the healthiest way to move through it instead of lashing out or turning it in on oneself. But I have noticed that my clients who are emotionally defined tend to have a natural bend toward writing and self-reflection in those low times. But what I tell the people who aren't into writing is that this isn't about being a great writer. This is about like word vomit coming out of you and onto the page. So I write a question that's very specific and I have them write out the question and then write the answer immediately after writing the question so that it's free flowing right into the answer. And I say, keep writing until the pen stops. So it's not meant to be grammatically correct. It's not meant to be seen by anybody else. If they want to share it with me in our next session, I'm happy to hear about what came up for them, but it's more about getting it out onto the page that has that energetic discharge from the body.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've had a journal since I was 7, and I don't know how people get through life without writing.
Yeah,
It's like the best friend that will just take it all, whether I'm
totally.
angry or happy or have secrets to share, just really doesn't matter. It's all going and it accepts it. So I'm a huge fan of writing, but I know it's not, I know it's not for everybody. However, the power of writing, I think, is really huge. That pen, that hand and mind connection is enormous. So there's one other thing that I wanted, well, actually two, before we kind of like jump into our final lightning round here. I guess we'll go with one. So respect your time. So obviously we didn't get to jump into human design and nerd out on it as much as I would have loved, but you'll come back and we'll do discussion. And but what I'd love to know from you is like, what components of the human design chart, like if people were going to go out and look up their chart, what is like the most important component of the chart for them to know? And I would say this like outside of their type.
Yes. So I'm going to explain and also mention that I have a free guide on my website and on my Instagram. So if you click the link in my bio on Instagram, you can go to the free Human Design Essentials guide and download it. So it goes through all the types with everything I mentioned written out, like one page for each type. And it goes through the decision-making authorities for every possible decision-making authority and explains how to use those in life and why that's important. So it's basically just like a free primer course on that. So I would say the decision-making authority is probably the next most important to the energy type. So basically how you're hardwired to make decisions for yourself. Because one of the big premises of human design is that the mind is meant to be a way to be inspired and inspire. It's meant to learn. It's meant to be curious. It's meant to serve other people, but it's not meant to be an authority on our own lives, because the mind naturally is judgmental and opinionated, which is fine. We need that for discernment in life. But when that's turned in on ourselves, it becomes toxic, as we all know, right? So it actually frees up the mind to do what it was created to do, which is create amazing things in the world and serve other people, not to rip ourselves apart and try to make decisions. Because we all know when we've tried to make decisions from our minds, it circles around our minds forever and ever, and we never feel confident about the decision. Whereas when we make decisions from this internal feeling that we have, and it's different for each person, then we feel like we can make a decision that's aligned. So as I mentioned, some people are emotionally defined. So that would be the about 50% of the population, Anna being one of them. So these are people that are meant to make decisions based on riding the current of that emotional wave until it comes back to stasis, until it comes back to a place of calm, and then making a decision based on the information that came through them on those highs and lows. Because you can imagine if you had that current of emotional wave and you made a decision on a high, and then you woke up the next day feeling bad and went, oh my God, why did I say yes to that? Mm-hmm. Vice versa. What if you said no when you were in a low, and then you felt better the next day and you really actually wanted to do that thing? You were just down, right? So that is just one example of how decision-making authority is so important, because these people are not meant to make decisions in the moment. Whereas other decision-making authorities, like me, for example, I am hardwired to make decisions in the moment. So when you look up your chart, it actually tells you what type of decision-making authority you are. And then you can go to the guide and read everything you need to know about it. On my website as well, I have a place where you can look up your chart. It's under the resources tab. And then right under that is the essentials guide.
Awesome. And we'll put everything underneath in the show notes for folks. Okay. I'm like so torn, because I just want to start talking about human design now. This is why I invented the discussion, but still it's hard.
We're gonna nerd out again. We're gonna nerd out. So
yes,
it's a dot, right?
Okay. Yes, definitely have to make it happen. So let's jump into the lightning round. Da-da-da. Okay, 4 questions. First question, what is the one habit you can't live without?
My morning coffee and breath work. I know that's not one habit, but my morning coffee is not your, spiritual heightened habit, but I love my morning coffee. It's the best. And then breath work is the single most nourishing thing I do for myself.
Love it. You can just wrap it up and call it morning routine.
Yeah, totally.
Sanity. I call my morning routine like getting fit for public consumption.
Yes, I love that.
Everybody needs it. I need it. It's good for everyone.
Yes.
Okay, number 2, what does spirituality mean for you?
Spirituality means surrendering to what you can't control and trusting that whatever's showing up for you is exactly where you're meant to be.
That's a quotable. I like it.
It feels the most inclusive and truthful to me. And it's what I always come back to when I'm doubting or skeptical.
Love it. Love it. Number 3, what is your advice to anyone who's looking to find their purpose?
Write by hand about all the things that you think, feel, that you have questions about, that you're curious about. Make lists, write things. Don't make it pretty. Don't do it with punctuation. Do it wildly. Do it when you're in the mood, especially if you're emotionally defined, if you know that about yourself. But regardless, do it when you're in the mood and see what emerges. It's not about being a writer. It's about being able on a physical space to be able to see tangibly what's coming out of you instead of letting it cycle around your head.
Yeah, writing's so powerful. Okay, and then last one, it's huge.
Okay.
Where can people connect with you online?
Okay, awesome. That's easy enough. So being the MG that I am, I have a couple of different ones. So for my music and voice teaching, if you're interested to know about that part of myself, it's at CMW Soprano on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Um, I speak really fast, so I'll say again, at CMW Soprano. And then for Serve Your Muse, it is serveyourmuse.com and at Serve Your Muse on Instagram.
Awesome. Yes, we'll put all the links in the show notes. I should have asked you if you were a soprano or an alto.
Well, you know now.
Now we know. All right, Miss Corinne. Well, thank you so much for being a part of the Soul Driven podcast and coming on and sharing your story with us. And we have to have you back to geek out about human design.
Oh yeah, we're gonna do it. We're gonna have a full nerd session.
Full on 2MG 13s. It's
yes.
gonna go deep.
Totally.
All right, folks. Thanks so much for joining us again today. If you were inspired by today's show, make sure to hit us up on social media, send an email, leave a review on iTunes, and subscribe. Be sure to sign up for our email list and get notifications for upcoming shows and free tools. And don't forget, when we invest in ourselves, the world benefits. Until next week.